At the desert edge, west of Memphis, the city changes its rules. The irrigation chatter quiets, the sand lifts, and the air carries a steady salt of natron. Corridors open where the ground seems closed, stairways sink where the horizon rises, and a new grammar begins. Here, the living bring oil and linen, names and time, and they sign for all of it in offerings in stone. To step down is to accept a contract, witnessed by gods who stand behind the walls. In this place, the city of the dead that never slept, the accounts are kept with patience and firelight. When the sun falls, jackals watch the ridge lines, and a guardian looks like them in painted gold. Anubis waits at thresholds, his titles spoken in low rooms, JMIWT in the place of embalming, NBTADSR, the Lord of the sacred land. Doors open to him, and to Osiris, whose court is a hall of balance and speech. These names are not decoration, they are the working rules of the corridors. The rites move because the names say they may, and the workers move because the contracts say they must. Across the floodplain, Memphis sleeps and wakes with water. But its West Bank partner, Saqqara, keeps another pulse. Mastabas and shafts, causeways and chapels turn labor into remembrance. The Old Kingdom left ledgers for priests in the Abusir papyri, daily rations and linen accounts, proof that offerings were scheduled work. A tomb cult needed bread, beer, incense, and salt. And it needed people who would show up, carry jars, light lamps, and say the words. In walls where the offering formula runs like a legal line, an offering which the king gives, the living pledge supplies to the dead, and the dead pledge continuity to the living. In the embalming rooms near the edge, the work is measured and calm. Bodies arrive on litters, they pass to the hands of embalmers, who know what each stage costs and requires. Natron dries, linen binds, resin seals, and a priest in a mask of Anubis speaks gently over the heart. Herodotus, who walked these lands centuries later, described price levels for embalming. A quiet admission that the price of immortality had tiers. In Saqqara, before and after him, the market did not hide. It agreed on a scale, it offered choice, and it kept the books. Under the ridge at Saqqara, a special city breathes, a city made for a single sacred life, repeated across reigns. The Serapeum of Apis cuts long galleries through bedrock, with chambers arranged like steady answers to time. Each chamber held a sarcophagus of granite, a box shaped for a god who was once a bull. While he lived, the Apis walked in Memphis, a sign of strength and omen, linked with Ptah by birth and with Osiris by death. When he died, he became Osiris Apis, and the city in the rock moved to serve his change. The procession left the sunlight, the priests let it down, and the galleries received it with lamps and chants that tied legal memory to mythic promise. Prince Kamwaset, a son of Ramesses II, ordered the making of the great galleries. His inscriptions preserve an intention to protect an honored dead and to repair earlier monuments. The plan continued through later dynasties, and the Ptolemies respected it with offerings and new stelae. Inside, the scale is human only by discipline. Every surface tells crews what to do and where to stand. You can still imagine the chalk marks for stone cutters, the recesses for lamps, the places where a foreman checked the width of a corridor with a cord. In the 19th century, Auguste Mariette traced the underground plan by clearing a line of sphinxes and finding the entrance. Then the galleries returned to their older silence. The point is simple. The catacomb is not an accident, it is a layout, and the layout served contracts that outlived a single reign. The stelae in the Serapeum carry dates by regnal years. They record which Apis was buried and which officials stood witness. Each epitaph lists the gifts brought, oil and myrrh, linen and jars, proof that supply chains touched the deep rooms. When the procession reached a chamber, the logistics tightened. Scribes checked names against tablets. The bearers took their marks, and the chamber crew set wedges under granite lids. It was hard work, measured by breadth and tool marks. The heavy pieces were not a spectacle, they were a quality standard. Granite meant duration, cedar oil promised preservation, linen promised care, and the cost of each item made the promise sound like law. In a desert that erodes speech, law is written in stone and in process. In the markets of Memphis, the linen sellers knew the burial season. They stocked bolts with temple patterns and measured lengths by custom. Embalmers needed clean cloth, and the per-nefer workshop paid fair coin for the right weave. Natron arrived in sacks from the north, lumped and pale, its weight telling porters what their day would feel like. Resins came from farther, some imported from the Levant, some traded down the Red Sea. The names of the oils appear in temple texts, on walls at Edfu and Dendera, and in late ritual papyri, a string of scents and viscosities that map where money flows. At the mouth of a corridor, an overseer of oil keeps accounts. He counts lamp wicks, he notes when a niche runs black, and he orders more jars from the storehouse. If a family has endowed a daily light at a tomb door, the overseer marks the lamp with a sign. Offerings for a private tomb lie on a smaller scale than the Apis rites, but the arithmetic is the same. Land deeds fund perpetual bread and beer. A half field here, a granary share there, and Ka priests collect the harvest portion. Then they deliver loaves to the chapel on a cycle. In stelae and contracts, you can read how memory pays its clerks. By daylight, the corridors breathe air that tastes of dust and resin. By night, they take on heat from lamps, and the soot walks along ceilings like smoke writing. Workers know the turns by feel, past the points where galleries branch, past the low stone stacks left by maintenance crews. There are recesses in the walls that hold stelae and small statues, gifts from officials who stood close to the rites. The Serapeum kept a memory of each burial with a dated stone, and each stone kept a memory of labor and supply. Anubis marks the flows with his titles, a patient sign for the living. He is the corridor guardian and the wheel of tasks, and he holds the logic that all this motion exists for stillness. The stillness is not empty, it is the condition that lets a name be spoken again. Osiris stands where judgment meets hope, and in Egypt the meeting is procedural. Heart weighs against feather, but it weighs in a place lit on schedule and stocked by contract. The gods act within rooms that smell of myrrh, and that smell was purchased at a fair price. Between the outer ridge and the inner galleries, the social map changes shape. A farmer who sold a corner of his field to endow bread becomes a donor in stone. A scribe whose son pays for a lamp becomes a line in a register. A king who gives a foundation gift for a temple becomes a list of rites carved on a pylon. The private and the public lives meet in the corridor, where a jar of oil speaks for someone who cannot be present, and a bolt of linen speaks for a family that counts its debt in years. In the reign lists and epitaphs, time compresses to useful units. The regnal year is a ledger row, the day of a burial is a fixed node. The month of a festival is a season for labor. Festival days pull processions out of Memphis, the Apis appears in life, and offerings scale up for spectacle and oath. That spectacle returns underground when death asks for quiet, and the same city that cheered on the surface now follows the measured steps below. The Serapeum received those steps with professional calm, and the workers kept their eyes on the order of tasks. In this landscape, failure has a cost. A lamp that goes out breaks a vow. A shortage of linen delays a binding. A late priest leaves a prayer unsaid. There are procedures for delay, there are fines for absence, and there are reputations that rise or fall with punctual rites. The papyri from temples near Cairo show that overseers audited deliveries, and that grain or oil missing from a route had to be explained. The dead did not accept excuses, the living would not dare to offer them, and the corridors aligned their work with that fear. Not every burial in Saqqara touched the Serapeum, most did not. Shafts opened for officials, chambers branched for families, and chapels above ground carried the daily tasks of remembrance. The reliefs in these chapels show bread tables and beer jars, and the scenes sit next to lists of offerings that read like order forms. The offering formula sets the legal frame, the lists fill it with stock items, and the priests handle fulfillment. Across centuries, the images never stop reminding viewers that memory is made of food and fire, and that food and fire must be paid for. When a bull was chosen as Apis, Memphis watched. When the bull died, Memphis mourned in public, then worked in private. The embalmers wrapped an animal as they wrapped a king, not in flattery, in order. The sarcophagus lids show the cost in scale and finish, and the inscriptions show the cost in time and witness. The Serapeum stelae name priests and administrators. They tie the rite to particular hands, and they compress the labor into a few lines of stone. Those lines survive because labor turned into law, and law left a mark worth preserving. In the quiet after a burial, the city in the rock shifts into maintenance. Clerks check oil levels and wick counts. Sweepers clear sand out of steps, and the air resets to its steady dryness. A family endowment might fund a weekly light, a monthly loaf, and a seasonal reading of a name. The rites for the Apis demand a stricter cycle, but both scales depend on the same vendors. Without jars and cloth, memory ceases, and without wages, vendors vanish. The entire system ties piety to payroll, and that tie is not cynicism, it is a design. Above ground, the causeways that run to older pyramids teach the same lesson. Reliefs at Unis and Teti show processions that move goods as much as symbols, with geese and incense, jars and bread, and long lines of men. At the desert edge, the art and the inventory agree that sacred order stands on delivered goods. A name does not seat itself in the afterlife without a cushion of linen and a diet of bread. And Egypt, careful and proud, made sure the cushion and the diet arrived. The priests in their jackal masks did not hide the costs. They governed them. The smell of cedar oil settles into limestone. Even when the lamps are out, a chamber remembers it, The sound of granite on wood lingers in the ears of men who lifted lids, even when they are back in Memphis with their families. The tomb guardians list absences at dawn, then sign for new wicks, and a boy runs to the storehouse with a message for more oil. In the chapel of a private tomb, the K priest lights a small flame, touches bread, and speaks a name that his father spoke before him. His voice is part prayer, part receipt. What was promised in an offering formula continues in clerical practice. House land can be assigned to a tomb cult, with a supervisor who must prove performance. The proof might be a witness statement, a stela that records a gift, or a line in a roll that notes a fulfilled day. In inscriptions at Saqqara, you can feel the pride of a well-run cult, the one that never missed an anniversary or a feast. The economic detail does not diminish the sacred, it makes it visible, and it explains why these corridors stayed alive. The Serapeum is not a museum, it is a schedule carved into stone. The chambers align by function, the galleries handle traffic, and the niches keep memory of gifts. The walls took in generations of footsteps, and each step ran on the same rule: do what is owed, and do it on time. The title for Anubis on certain doorways reminds crews that the place belongs to the sacred land, and that even a broom has standing when it sweeps for a vow. If a metaphor belongs here, it is this. The earth is a ledger that asks to be balanced, south to north. The necropolis at Saqqara leans into Memphis, and the Nile feeds both with time and work. When the inundation comes, crews move with it, and when the fields lie quiet, workshops fill. The embalmers know these cycles, and the vendors plan stock around them. A large burial draws labor from smaller chapels, then returns that labor by endowment gifts and shared food. Feast calendars collapse distances, with a household in the city and a chamber in the rock, partaking in one meal, everyone eating because one name must be remembered. By late afternoon, a narrow shaft glows with the last light. The color of the limestone turns warm and layered, and the figures on stelae look almost soft. A foreman sets 2 lamp wicks aside for the night party. The rest go into a jar marked for tomorrow. The air cools, and a scribe closes his tablet with a quick breath to dry the ink. The silence is not empty. It is charged with agreements. In that quiet, Osiris holds his place without effort, because effort surrounded him all day. At the edge of the ridge, the wind lifts a thin sand veil and drops it again. The city below it, a city of long galleries and patient chambers, remains awake in its own way. It waits for the next delivery and the next rite, the next procession and the next whispered name. Even if no feet strike the floor tonight, oil will be counted and bread will be scheduled, because tomorrow has already been promised. The workers go home by the straight line of a causeway, their steps steady, their pay earned. When the Serapeum closes for the night, a few lamps burn in small niches near doorways. The soot builds in slow rings around stone. The rings mark weeks and months without speaking. A supervisor touches the stone with his finger, reads the soot like a calendar, and nods. The last crew out checks the door bars, then breathes the cooler air at the stair mouth. Behind them, the long galleries hold most of the city's stillness, and stillness is the richest commodity here. Before we leave, we look once at the names that anchor this machine. Kaiamwa sets order, the galleries he planned, the apis stelae in rows, the inscriptions that speak for witnesses, the abusir papyri Far to the north, the temple accounts at Edfu and Dendera, the lines that name oils and rations, all of them sit behind the visible rites like ledgers behind a counter. The offering formula is the signature, the delivery is the act, and the god is the guarantor. The corridors feel heavy because they carry that weight of proof. As the oil dwindles, the lamps bow to the dark, and the crews lock the doors in the sand. Anubis holds the corridor by title, Osiris holds the court by promise, and Memphis holds the market by skill. Our path rises to the ridge and turns to the wind. Then, with the night at our backs, we angle north toward another city of the dead. The stair at el-Shoqafa waits past the delta, and a different contract carries the light down. At the limestone lip above Alexandria, the ground opens in a careful circle, and the air turns cool. A stair coils around a central shaft, the steps worn, the walls close, the curve tight enough to steady the hands. Bodies went down this shaft on a rope. The helical stair watched them in slow circles, and the corridor swallowed the sound. This is el-Shoqafa, a catacomb of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, a house where Serapis speaks in rock and where families bought time in stone. At the bottom of the descent, a rotunda receives the visitor. Column bases rise out of the bedrock, water gleams in a basin cut for ritual, and the circular plan calms the eye after the spiral. A vestibule frames the main façade, carved so that Egyptian and Roman eyes both understand it, and the door to the tomb room holds a grammar that crosses languages. Reliefs flank the portal, serpents lift their heads. The crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt rest above them, and the coiled guardians carry shields like soldiers of the city. On the façade, Anubis appears in a cuirass, the jackal head steady, the human body armored like a centurion, his right hand raised in a salute that looks like a blessing. In a niche nearby, a figure of Serapis wears the modius, the grain measure on the head, the sign that he governs fertility and order. The reliefs show Osiris in mummiform stillness, and Isis stands close, her hands quiet, her words implied. The language of images does not argue, it manages flows, and here the flow runs from living markets to carved memory. In the main chamber, sarcophagi stand behind sliding stone panels, the fronts carved with Egyptian scenes made with Roman depth. The lid of a central coffin shows a face that could walk a street in the city. The wig and collar turn that face toward older ritual, and the combination feels deliberate. Names in Greek ride the surfaces of some chambers. Egyptian titles still appear in the ornament, and Latin letters are rare but not absent. The dead in this house draw their dignity from both banks of the Mediterranean, and the gods welcome that choice. Between the façade and the burial rooms, small corridors open, loculi line the walls, and niches stack into a practical grid. A family could purchase a chamber with a sarcophagus. A more distant relative could find a place in a loculus, and the city handled the paperwork for both. Inscriptions mark some places as assigned. A name and a year fix the rite, and the stone knows the holder. The logic is simple. The nearer and more decorated, the dearer; the farther and simpler, the cheaper, an interpretation in line with Roman practice on both shores. In Alexandria, associations managed death as they managed trade. The embalmers, the terashutai, worked with undertakers, the necrotaphoi, and they brought bodies to this stair. Papyri from Roman Egypt record Eranos' contributions for funerals. Pooled money that covered basic rites, and the habit extended to the city. At el-Shoqafa, the fees for space and upkeep would follow that pattern, not always written on the wall, but heard at a counter and enforced by keepers who knew the ledgers by heart. At the level of the rotunda, a long room opens with 3 couches carved into stone. The air keeps a calm echo, the benches rise like steps of a memory stage, and a table line is still visible along the center. This is a triclinium, a dining room for the dead, a place for the living to recline among the niches and speak names over food and wine. The Roman word refrigerium describes the meal that cools grief and refreshes bonds. And Alexandrian families practiced it with a local accent, mixing Greek form with Egyptian invocation. On feast days, the triclinium turned busy. Oil lamps stood in wall niches. Bread loaves came wrapped in cloth, and jars of wine waited on the floor. A reader recited a name, measured and slow, and a cousin repeated a short prayer asking for gentle waters in the afterlife. The tables held dates, olives, and cooked fish, the city's harbor never far from the menu, and the meal tied the living to the stone as firmly as an epitaph. When the plates emptied, a runner checked the wicks, and a steward recorded the cost of oil for the sponsor family. In the deeper rooms, the hybrid reliefs keep speaking. A mummification scene shows an Egyptian couch and a Roman drape. A priest wears a jackal mask, while a second figure holds a Greek staff, and the 2 styles fit without strain. On a pilaster, a serpent carries the crown of Upper Egypt, and the shield sits near a caduceus. A local agathodaimon turned into a house guard. The design instructs without text. A citizen will understand the shield, a priest will understand the crown, and both will accept the shared authority of the space. Under the main staircase, a secondary descent lowers toward a set of smaller galleries. Here the loculi grow tighter, and the air turns dry and still. Lamp niches dot the walls at regular intervals. The spacing teaches how often light was needed, and the soot tells how often someone cared to supply it. On a cross wall, a small cupboard cavity holds vessels for libation. The stone lips are chipped by repeated pours, and a shallow channel runs toward the floor. This is maintenance in ritual form, a way to pay the debt of memory with liquid. When a family purchased a chamber, a clerk likely offered options. The chamber could be sealed with a sliding slab, it could carry a painted relief, and it could include a small altar for oil. The more complete the package, the more stable the memory, an opinion formed by inscriptions that advertise permanence. In Greek epitaphs from Alexandria, phrases like eternal memory or memory never to be destroyed appear with prices implied. The fee bought the promise, and the promise asked for continued lamps. On the north side of the complex, a larger chamber holds many bones, collected with little care. The room dates to the early 3rd century, and later voices named it for a massacre under Caracalla, an identification that remains debated. The anchor is the date and the deposit, not the label, and the deposit tells its own story, of crowded death in a time of tension, and of a catacomb used as a civic vessel. The rest of the house maintained a more regular order. The mass deposit sits as an exception inside that rule. Through the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Serapis remained the quiet patron of this house. His temple stood on a high platform in the city, and his face with the modius served as a seal for rituals below. The god's origin harmonized Osiris and Apis, the court and the strength, and that harmony fit the mixed households of Alexandria. A Greek merchant could speak to him without fear, an Egyptian scribe could speak to him without betrayal, and the catacombs' walls made this pact visible in stone. In one corridor, a depiction of Anubis in military dress watches an entrance. Boots grip the base, a short sword hangs near the hip, and the hand rests on a spear. The jackal head fixes the message: this is not a Roman soldier, this is a god using Roman forms, and the permission flows both ways. The city can bring its clothes into the tomb can bring its gods into the city, and the exchange is not mere fashion. It is a guarantee that memory will be protected under any uniform the century offers. Below the rotunda, the geometry keeps order. The circular plan gathers visitors. The axial passage guides them. The side chambers distribute family lines, and the stairs return the bodies to the center. The shaft in the middle was a machine, a rope and a crate and a winch, and the stair was the human path that accompanied the work. Undertakers lowered the dead gently. The rope slipped, stopped, and slipped again, and the silence offered a tight space for a last name. When a procession entered the complex, a sequence followed. An oil lamp was lit for the way. A libation marked the threshold, and the bearers waited for the undertaker to assign the corridor. The assignment took account of earlier purchases. A clerk checked a tablet, and a family spokesman nodded. Within the chamber, a stone cutter had already finished the slot or the sarcophagus, and a painter had filled the relief with modest color. When the body rested, the slab closed. A name was read out in Greek or in Demotic Egyptian, and a steward recorded the lamp endowment. Inscriptions from Alexandria help fix the scale of hope. Some epitaphs carry the formula of memory eternal, others name the years of a life with civic pride, and a few mention the care of the tomb in simple terms. There is no single tariff carved on these walls. The habit of written price lists belongs more to other cities, but the structure can still be seen. A loculus near a crossroads commands attention. A chamber near the façade signals rank, and the triclinium ties all spaces to a rhythm of meals and visits. On certain days, a family host would supply more oil than usual. A saint is not the center here. The house keeps to family memory, but the idea of an anniversary is the same. The couches fill, cups move from hand to hand, and a quiet conversation keeps the names alive. The keeper of the triclinium counts wicks again, and the book restates a promise made by an ancestor long ago. The city above keeps trading and sailing. The city below keeps lighting and speaking, and neither wants to sleep for long. Near the entrance, a small relief shows a dining scene with a basket of bread. The basket is Egyptian in style, the couches are Roman, and the plates sit in a mixed order. The sculptor did not need to resolve the styles into one. The house resolves them by practice, and the visitors resolve them by habit. The dead require attention, the living require form. Serapis offers both, and the stair teaches everyone how to move within this pact. The air in the galleries keeps a gentle chalk scent. Limestone that met so much breath stays warm for a moment after a group passes, then returns to the base cool of rock. Drops collect near a low basin, a slow condensation that makes a soft sound, and even that sound fits the etiquette. When a child speaks too loudly, a mother touches his sleeve, and the touch says that this place is a court, and that the court has hours and rules. A clerk in the antechamber sat by a small desk, his stylus ready, his tablet under a cloth. He recorded the name, the place assigned, and the amount of oil promised for the year. If the promise exceeded a threshold, the family might receive a relief or an inscription. If it matched the minimum, the lamp would still burn on the appointed days. Across Roman Egypt, papyri show endowments for shrines and graves, a field or a rent allocated for care, and the principle fits this house, even when the exact figures do not appear on its walls. Within a single family, generations stacked in predictable ways. The first purchaser took the central sarcophagus, the next took a nearby loculus, and later members accepted more distant places. The triclinium brought the lines back together. 3 couches that ignored distance for an evening, and a recited kinship that closed gaps. This is subscription in the near sense, a duty renewed at set times, a light paid for in advance, and a meal that folded memory into appetite. Within the relief program, the mythic layer stays visible, and it stays practical. Osiris accepts a mummy prepared with care, Horus looks on without thunder, and Thoth reads what has been written. The Roman eye finds a household scene in the carving style. The Egyptian ear hears the old words in the arrangement, and neither is wrong. The god of the city, Serapis, sits behind the ritual like a patient landlord, his modius in place, his gaze steady, his job to hold the roof over both languages. In the turn between corridors, small pilasters carry protective signs. The palm frond appears, a sign of victory over death, and the lotus opens, a sign of rebirth at dawn. These are not esoteric, they are public, and they pair with anchors of civic life, a cornucopia for plenty, a prow for the harbor. The house declares that death belongs to the city as much as commerce or law, and that the care of graves is as organized as the grain fleet that feeds Alexandria. When a keeper finds a failed lamp, he notes the breach. A letter goes up to the surface. A runner walks it to a family address or to the office of an association. The reply comes with oil or money, and the keeper resets the wick with a professional touch. The system forgives a lapse once, it finds a second miss, and it remembers who is casual with the dead. Memory is mercy only after it is method, and el-Shoqafa prefers method. During the 2nd century, Alexandria grew thick with guilds and households that mixed lands and names. The catacomb mirrors that mix with form instead of law. The Roman triclinium lies beside Egyptian guardians. The Greek letters frame Egyptian rites, and the entire program refuses to choose. The refusal is not confusion. It is a strategy, a way to make memory safe in a market city with many gods and 2 official languages. In a side room, a niche holds small figures of Isis and Harpocrates. The child god places a finger to his lips, a gesture of secrecy and care, and the mother looks outward with a gentle severity. The pair traveled well in the Roman world, their images familiar even in cities far from the Nile, and here they reassure visitors that the words said in this room will be heard in the proper place. Silence is an offering, and the house accepts it as dutifully as oil. Over time, the surfaces took in the trace of hands, even where carvings remain crisp, edges smooth a little, where visitors leaned to read a name. The steps down from the rotunda show a slight hollow, the measure of many quiet processions, and the shaft through the center holds a promise of reliable descent. Undertakers trained apprentices here. The rope crew learned patience in circles, and the carvers learned restraint in a house where excess would read as pride. If a scholar asks how much a loculus cost, the wall does not answer cleanly. The pattern of Roman practice suggests a scale by position and ornament, and inscriptions that name purchase and assignment support that logic. In the absence of a tariff list on site, we look to papyri from the Nile Valley for analogies. Fees for cemetery plots, wages for undertakers, costs for oil, all recorded in contracts that sound like everyday speech. The catacomb does not isolate itself from that economy. It gives it sacred gravity. At the front of the complex, the façade maintains a precious tension. A pediment frames Egyptian figures with Roman architecture. A doorway echoes a temple pylon without taking its full weight, and the symmetry pleases a Greek-trained eye without losing Egyptian authority. The design persuades without shouting. It tells a visitor that both worlds will be honored here, and that the dead will rest under a reasonable contract. The contract binds the living more than the dead, because it is the living who must deliver oil and speech. When a group finishes a meal in the triclinium, they do not leave the cups dirty. A steward wipes surfaces with a damp cloth, a boy sweeps crumbs into a basket, and a woman touches the couch edge as if it were a shoulder. The care is ordinary, the room is not, and the ordinary care makes the memory hold. The practice looks like domestic life, and that is the point. The house teaches that remembrance is a household duty in a public place. On an afternoon in late summer, light finds the rotunda and turns the water in the basin a soft green. Steps whisper as a small group enters. The voices are low, and a name rises once to join a list started years ago. The reader closes his tablet, the keeper nods, the lamps eat their measured oil, and the house returns to its steady breath. Nothing feels temporary, everything feels scheduled, and the schedule holds grief without breaking it. In the 3rd century, the city's mood darkened more than once. War touched the delta, prices jumped, a plague crossed sea routes, and the cemeteries grew busier. El-Shoqafa absorbed the pressure with discipline. The shaft did not hurry, the stairs did not widen, and the triclinium kept its rules. If a chamber filled too quickly, a new corridor opened into the rock, and the keepers adjusted their books. The catacomb took crisis as a change in workload, and work remained work. By the 4th century, Christian households used other places for burial, and new symbols began to govern hope. The habit of dining among the dead did not vanish overnight. It changed address and meaning, and the city adjusted. El-Shoqafa kept its earlier promise to those already placed. The lamps that had been endowed kept their schedule, and the dead were not moved. The house of Serapis stayed a house of Serapis for those who had paid for that care, and that fidelity confirms what the reliefs declare. When the last group of a day climbs the helical stair, the rotunda rests in a cooler quiet. A keeper circles the outer corridor, his lamp held low, his eye on the wick marks, and his hand finding each niche in turn. He notes a fissure to be packed with lime. He pushes a pebble away from a step, and he ties a cloth over the basin. Surface work waits above. Sea wind returns to the alleys, and harbor bells speak to sailors who have no business here. As the lamp smoke thins, the eyes of Serapis on the façade seem to hold their light. The jackal in armor keeps his post, the serpents keep their crowns, and the couches wait for a morning without hurry. The shaft stands as a silent instrument, a device that made descent humane, and the stair stands as a covenant with those who walk. Families have converted coin into time here, they have turned food into speech, and they have asked stone to help them keep their word. When we leave the rotunda, we do not look back. The stair insists on caution, the climb commands attention, and the mouth of the shaft presents the sky with an abrupt grace. We step into Alexandria with the sea in the air, the Serapeum on its height to the west, and the market moving on cue. The city works because it keeps its records, and the catacomb works because it keeps its lamps, and together they explain why death here feels managed rather than wild. Our path must turn again. The story of corridors wants another city, and the next corridors run beneath Rome. The idea of loculi and cubicula, the habit of inscriptions and small signs, the fees and the subscriptions, they will sound familiar soon. We leave the house of Serapis with the lamps in order. We let the stair coil itself back into shadow, and we follow the trade winds of ritual toward the next underground. The tunnels of Callixtus and Priscilla wait with their own logic, and their traffic will tell us why a different city kept its dead awake. At the first milestone of the Appian Way, the soil softens, and the rock accepts a cut. Tufa opens with steady blows, corridors push forward, and the air turns cool. This is Rome underground, a city for the dead with rules, and a workforce that knows each rule by tool and hour. The catacomb of Callixtus grew here in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, its loculi stacked like ledgers, its cubicula opened like family rooms. In these galleries, the dead lie lengthwise in wall slots sealed with slabs. The slabs carry names, sometimes in Greek, sometimes in Latin, and often with simple signs. A fish swims above Irene, an anchor steadies near Agape, a dove lifts a branch near Felix, and a shepherd walks with a ram on his shoulders. The symbols teach gently. Hope looks like a boat on a safe mooring, and rest sounds like water. Farther north along the Via Salaria, the catacomb of Priscilla cuts a different plan. Its galleries wind toward the older quarry rooms, and the Greek chapel holds painted scenes with calm color. A woman stands in the oran's pose, arms lifted in prayer, and a small banquet scene rests nearby. Scholars read the table as a shared meal. Some read a sacramental image, others a memorial feast. The practice of refrigerium gives both readings room. Within both houses, work repeats with discipline. Diggers, the fossors, measure a new corridor, their picks shaping a steady curve, their lamps fixed into niches at set spans. Marble cutters in the city carve thin epitaph slabs, the letters deep enough to hold a touch, the formula often brief. A name, a date, a word of peace, in pace, and sometimes a life counted in years and months, to anchor loss in time. The price of burial follows Roman habit. Across Italy, burial clubs kept lists of dues and benefits, the famous Lanuvium tablet from 136 names, fees, and payouts. A member paid monthly, his heirs received a funeral allowance, and the club provided a place and a procession. In Rome, Christian communities used similar tools, subscriptions for the poor, gifts for lamps, and an administrator who kept the books with care. Inside Callixtus, families purchased loculi by need and by rank. Near crossings, the slabs drew more eyes, and the price likely rose with attention. A cubiculum cost more than a single slot, a painted wall cost more than rough tufa, and a lamp endowment promised light on agreed days. The contract was not cold, it was precise, and precision is how grief survives a city. In Priscilla, paint carries much of the teaching. On curved ceilings, vines curl into living frames, doves perch near baskets, and a small shepherd smiles with a still kindness. The Greek chapel holds a seated figure breaking bread among 7 people, an image many read as a community meal. The interpretation remains careful. The anchor is the paint. The meaning follows the habits of the living who ate among graves. When a body arrived at a catacomb door, a simple sequence governed entry. A lamp was lit, a short prayer said, and a clerk checked the assignment. The bearers lowered the coffin on straps, the wall received its slot, and a worker set the slab. A painter traced a fish with a quick hand, a cutter added a name, and a woman pressed her palm to damp plaster until it held her heat. Callixtus gathered more than families. It gathered leaders. A chamber later called the Crypt of the Popes holds 3rd century inscriptions for bishops of Rome, and the area drew visitors after peace returned to the church. In the late 4th century, Pope Damasus wrote poems for martyrs across the cemeteries, his verse cut in clean letters, his stairs and frames guiding feet. The catacombs learned to handle traffic, and traffic learned to move with reverence. Pilgrim paths in late antiquity ran by habit and rumor as much as by maps. Along the Appian Way, visitors asked for Sixtus, asked for Cecilia, asked for places where prayers felt near. Keepers managed the flow, lamps were rationed, and stairs widened where crowds pressed too hard. The galleries kept their low voices, a city teaching strangers how to walk. Refrigerium did not belong only to Alexandria or to pagan Rome. In Roman cemeteries, families met at tombs on anniversaries. They ate and poured, and they spoke names aloud. In Christian practice, the meal changed meaning. The habit remained, a quiet gathering at a grave, a psalm, and bread. Triclinium near certain entrances served these meetings, roofs for shade, benches for rest, and walls that learned 1,000 low conversations. The epitaph workshops along the roads did brisk trade, thin marbles with red letters dried on racks, ready for delivery by cart. Names like Agape, Irene, and Probus cross languages with ease. The words in pace and dormant in pace cross philosophies with a smile. Dates anchor lives in consular years, or in months of the Roman calendar, and a small fish or an anchor completes the thought without strain. Fees and subscriptions held the system together. A steward kept the lamp fund for a corridor. He counted wicks, he ordered oil by weight, and he wrote to families when a promise slipped. If a donor missed a year, the lamp was dark on a day when the name should have shone. A second miss drew a fine, a third drew a visit, and the visit cleared the ledger or moved the lamp to a humbler niche. In both Callixtus and Priscilla, the walls preserve prayers in the simplest form. A child's short name, a father's trade, a mother's hope, all cut with a mason's quiet concentration. The symbols keep the theology close to touch. The anchor for steadfast hope, the fish for a name spoken as a sentence, the shepherd for a care that bends to lift. Stone turns doctrine into posture, and posture survives smoke. In Priscilla, a small vault shows Jonah and the fish, the prophet in 3 scenes of crisis and rescue. The story bends toward return and breath, an image that comforted households who drew water and counted days. The Orin's figure repeats nearby, arms raised, eyes open, and the composition keeps death inside a pattern of listening and reply. Paint does not argue, it waits for breath and light. Within the galleries, the job titles tell a city at work. Fossors dig, cubicularii oversee rooms, diaconal staff carry lists and oil, and a presbyter reads the names at a feast. The Latin words arrive on small plaques and in later calendars, but the roles fit the space. The rhythm is familiar. A corridor needs oil, like a street needs water, and a community needs both delivered on time. The business side remains visible even at a martyr's tomb. A keeper sells small lamp time, a shop near the entrance cuts fresh slabs, and a boy runs messages to an epitaph writer in the city. Gifts come from outlying regions, olive oil from the coast, wicks from workshops near the Tiber, and wine from nearby hills. The traffic hums, and the humming is part of the prayer. In the 4th century, peace protects these places, and pressure grows with protection. More families buy space, more names seek walls, and the planners open new levels to keep pace. In Callixtus, galleries step down in terraces, the air cools further, and the lamps draw breath in deeper rooms. The system scales with care, and care keeps grief from breaking its edges. By the 5th century, the balance begins to change. Urban basilicas rise over graves, liturgy gathers above ground, and some endowments shift toward altars within the city. The catacombs do not close in a day, they lighten their workload. Pilgrims still descend, families still renew lamps, but fewer processions arrive with new boards and bolts of cloth. The lamps count the change without complaint. When payments stop, stone remembers. A dark lamp tells a story a clerk can read. A dust line around a niche shows months without touch. 2 cousins share a loculus that was meant for one, because the fee allowed it, and the family adapted. A marble is reused over a nearby slot, the old name softened by the new cut, and the keeper notes the compromise with a thin line on his tablet. Reform does not erase habit, it rounds it. The meals near tombs lose noise and wine, the prayers gain structure, and the same love follows a different route. Inscriptions continue to speak the formula of peace, in pace, and a shepherd still leans into stone with the same mild weight. The economy of memory changes supplier, the contract keeps its terms. If we step back to see the map, the logic comes clear. In Egypt, Osiris and Anubis governed corridors where oil and linen fixed time. In Alexandria, Serapis held a mixed house together, with a stair that taught patience and descent. In Rome, shepherd signs and anchors held families to a schedule of care, with fees and subscriptions keeping lamps alive. The gods varied, the contracts rhymed, and the rhymes outlived storms. Within Callixtus, the crypt of the popes gained a new skin of order in Damascus's time. Fresh stairs, careful frames, and verses that named courage drew visitors into lines. The work brought clarity, and clarity brought more feet, a cycle that asked for more wicks and wine. A city cannot keep memory awake without paying for light, and Rome paid in coin and craft. In Priscilla, painters leaned into damp plaster with calm hands. The tiny banquet scene records a grief managed by table ritual, a plate set for the absent, a cup tipped gently to the stone. The orange stands over the idea, the body makes what the mouth hopes, and the room holds both promises. A corridor does not need to shout to persuade, it needs to keep dates. Epitaph workshops adjusted to the Christian market without losing skill. The same carvers who cut pagan slabs learned the curve of a fish and the shape of a chi. They kept their price lists in their heads, a thicker marble for a higher fee, a line of verse for a patron who read. When they delivered, a clerk checked the spelling, and a child traced the letters with a finger. The social arithmetic stays visible across the walls. Freedmen rest beside citizens. Women name their offices in quiet pride. widows speak in their own voice. The catacomb democratizes by plan. A narrow slot is not a throne, and a name in a line of names feels like a street. The humility is not empty, it is a design choice tied to budget and belief. When a pilgrim group gathers at a martyr's place, the manager watches the oil. He knows how many wicks the morning cost, he knows how many cups the afternoon will demand, and he knows which family promised refills. The poems of Damasus glow in shallow light. A shepherd image watches, and the corridor breathes like a slow instrument. Rome understands cues, even underground. At the turn to evening, the galleries cool. The pick marks on the walls look like writing. The soot above the niches rings the calendar, and the air tastes faintly of wine and resin. A presbyter finishes a list of names. The final, in pace, leaves his lips, and a child chases a whisper that he believes he heard. The keepers close holes in the path with rubble, then hide the repair line with a careful sweep. If a scholar asks for exact tariffs, the walls answer in habits, not tables. Position costs attention, ornament costs hours, light costs oil, and speech costs training. The Lanuvium tablet gives the model, the Roman papyri give the forms, and the catacomb wraps both inside a sacred frame. The economy does not shrink the sacred, it lets the sacred keep time. In both houses, the paint and stone do not promise what they cannot deliver. The fish is a memory cue, the anchor is a steady hand, the shepherd is a posture of help. The words on the marble are modest, the dates are plain, and the names refuse flattery. This reserve keeps the place honest, and honesty lets the rooms carry grief without breaking. By the late 5th century, attention thins. The basilicas within the walls catch more offerings, and new halls of worship take over the meals. Some corridors in the suburbs fall quiet for days, then for weeks, and the keepers adjust their rounds. The lamps reply with slower soot, the dust rings widen, and the voices of the dead depend even more on the discipline of a few. What began with contracts ends with contracts. In Egypt, endowments funded bread and light. In Alexandria, families converted coin into time in stone, and in Rome, subscriptions bought peace and a slot. The gods stood behind each promise with different faces, the workers signed with different tools, and the result felt the same. Memory became a managed good, and the city learned to protect it. When we step away from the Roman earth, we hold two weights in the hand. One is myth, the figure that makes judgment and hope visible. Osiris with his scales, Serapis with his measure, Christ as a shepherd who never loses a path. The other is contract, the writing that forces time to behave, the ledger that funds a wick, the clause that calls a worker to a door. Together, they make the city of the dead that never slept. At the last turn, the corridors narrow, and a small light draws thin circles on the tufa. A keeper counts the final wicks. He closes a ledger, and he lifts a lamp to read a name with care. The stone answers with quiet, the paint answers with soft color, and the air returns to rock. We walk up tonight with a list in our head, oil, linen, names, time, and we carry the knowledge that memory is work,